So the title of today is Evolution of Democracy. What's next? From people awareness to humanity awareness. So in that subtitle, there is an idea about what might be next. So let's just dive into the topic. So who am I? I'm the president of the Academy for Advancement of Human Values. Patrick just mentioned that. And our mission is to discover, incubate, and develop ideas and concepts support the evolution of human consciousness. That's really what I'm all about, focusing on the evolution of human consciousness, because up to about 200,000 years ago, evolution was always about species. But actually, I believe it was always about consciousness. And evolution in this last 200,000 years has been about the evolution of human consciousness. If you want to find out what I'm talking about, a lot of what I'm going to say today you can find on this website, www.aahv.global. I'll mention it again at the end also. So what are today's topics? First of all, I'm going to talk about governance systems, the evolution of human consciousness, and a new humanity awareness initiative. Well, actually, this is an initiative I started working on about 2 or 3 years ago, but then now it is beginning to come to fruition, and I'll explain what it is about. So, according to the Economic Intelligence Unit, there are 4 different types, or the democracies on a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum are purely authoritarian regimes, where there is no political pluralism. These are monarchies and dictatorships, and there's abuse of civil liberties. Next come what are called hybrid regimes. These are nations where elections are not fair and not free, and a slight improvement on the authoritarian regime. Then we get to flawed democracy. This is where elections are fair and free, but where basic civil liberties are honored, but there'll be issues of undeveloped political culture, low levels of participation, and problems with the functioning of governance. And then we move to full democracy. This is where nations where civil liberties and fundamental political freedoms are respected. So this is a broad classification from the Economic Intelligence Unit. So in terms of full democracies, there are 22. Flawed democracies, 54, hybrid regimes, 37, and authoritarian regimes, 54. But only less than 6% of people live in full democracies. I think this is a very important statistic that we have to keep in our minds. So the type of governance systems a nation adopts depends on the dominant worldview of the people. Now, I'm going to talk about the evolution of worldviews, and a particular worldview actually influences every aspect of how we live together. Since the arrival of Homo sapiens, about 200,000 years ago, there have been 6 worldviews. Each new worldview was precipitated by changes in human living conditions that triggered new stages of collective human psychological development. So there's a link between human psychological development and worldviews. And this is fundamental to understanding how worldviews change and what is happening in the world right now. So here's the evolution of worldviews. We started off with the clan awareness when we were hunter-gatherers. I will go into more detail in a moment. Then we moved into tribe awareness. We were living in clan awareness for almost 190,000 years before tribe awareness arrived on the scene. And in the last 10,000 years, we've been through all of these different worldviews. We moved into state awareness. This was the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, and even nowadays we see the state awareness showing up. In fact, in the world today, there are something like 180 countries that are actually out of 145 that I've looked at that are operating from state awareness. In nation awareness, we've got about 22 countries operating from nation awareness, which is the next level. Then we move into wealth awareness. It's quite a recent worldview where there are only 8 nations operating from wealth awareness at this moment, and then people awareness, where we have 7 nations operating from people awareness. And that's the top of the evolutionary scale when it comes to collective living conditions. And now, emerging through all of this pandemic, through all of these global crises, is a new worldview. I call it humanity awareness. The very survival of a species is dependent on the adoption of this worldview. This is a point that I've been making for some time now, and we have to shift to this new worldview, or we will not survive. Sounds strong, doesn't it? But that is my earnest belief. So let's talk about the evolution of worldviews. First of all, clan awareness. Now, there are still pockets of clan awareness. You find it in Papua New Guinea. You can also find it in Brazil. This is about survival through sharing and reciprocity. Governance is participatory, based on rules, rituals, and traditions, and there's no laws in this type of awareness. The cosmology is nature spirits, earth is a divine mother, and a lot of shamanic practices. Leadership is situational, depending on experience and competence of the people. And remember, we're talking about small, extended family groups. Gender roles are defined by nature and the needs of the clan. So in this worldview, the needs of the clan are fundamental. We move into tribe awareness. There are still a lot of people or communities that operate from tribe awareness. This is safety through belonging and loyalty. So you saw that the first one was about survival, and this one is about safety. So you can see we're actually moving up Maslow's hierarchy here at a collective level. Governance is a chief or a council of elders, but there is also ethnic discrimination. If you're in this tribe and you're not in that tribe, well, you know, your safety depends on being loyal to your tribe. There's a focus on the spirit world and on ancestors, magic potions, evil spirits, voodoo, things of that nature are part of the cosmology. Leadership, we generally have a big man or a chief who shows off his status through wealth and possessions and perhaps several wives. So gender roles are defined by the needs of the tribe, the needs for survival and safety. So focusing on the needs of the tribe is fundamental in this worldview. We now move to state awareness. Now this is security through power and strength. It's a very authoritarian type of governance where people are controlled and there is ideological discrimination. Cosmology, there are various cosmologies. It could be a single god or a pantheon of gods, usually representing the forces of nature. Leadership is repressive. There's absolutely no trust. Even the leader of the nations in state awareness don't trust anybody else, not even their family. North Korea is a good example, or an extreme example of this type of leadership. And gender, women have absolutely no rights and are mostly treated as sexual objects. So the focus here actually is on the needs of the leader. It's really not on the needs of the people. The leader is paramount and his strength and power is significant. And if a more powerful leader comes along, then the old leader will be ousted. You know, this is of former USSR, even to a certain extent, we find this type of leadership in already. It's still in China and Russia, not to the same extreme as before. Then we moved to nation awareness. What happened here was we moved into flawed democracy. So democracy began to have a role, but not everybody got to vote. And the key factor here is that monotheistic religions came in and controlled, had a lot of control over governance. So we have the Christians and Islam, And there was a strong sense of moral conduct. So in a sense, nation awareness brought organization and order to the chaos of state awareness. Here we begin to see leaders who are elected, but they tend to try to manipulate the rules to stay in power. And initially in this worldview, they felt like they had a divine right to rule. So there was a link between the leader and God. That is no longer the case in nation awareness, but that's how it started. Now, women are still second-class citizens and controlled by men. So the focus here is on the needs of the monarch, the landowners, and the elected elites, the top of the most influential people in terms of power, authority, and education. Then we moved into wealth awareness. Now, this has been around for 200 or 300 years now. This is security through status and influence, whereas before it was security through authority. This is security through influence, and of course money talks. So we find some full democracies in this, but governance is usually two-party systems where on the one hand you have a representation from, who mostly represent the middle class and the rich, and the other side is poor. But so this is typical of the United Kingdom and the USA. Cosmology here is science. In this worldview, there is no God. It's just random mutations. So before, in nation awareness, we had this external God, and in wealth awareness, we have no God. And as you will see in a moment, when we move to people awareness, God went into side. I'll explain what I mean by that. In this one worldview, status and influence are key in politics, and business elites try to influence things through money and corruption. Of course, there was a lot of corruption also in nation awareness and state awareness. Now, women now have more of a role here, and they still don't have full equality. It's difficult to get past that glass ceiling, as we say in business. So here is the focus on the needs of the business and the wealthy elites. So inequality grows in wealth awareness, and it meets its own demise, which is exactly what is going on in large parts of the world right now. I'll say more about that in a moment. And well, some of you from Sweden may recognize this. This is people awareness. And this is freedom through equality and accountability. So governance is what I call a liberal democracy. There are coalition governments where different shades of opinion are represented in government decision-making, and a lot of consensus building. The cosmology here in the background is spirituality. This is what I meant when I said, instead of worshipping external God and then no God, now the God has gone inside, and we look to our own personal growth and our own spirituality, which leads us into the idea of we're all equal at that level, and so there's no discrimination. We see women leaders now coming forth, and this is the really interesting phenomenon. And from my point of view, a very welcome phenomenon. And we move from belief-based decision-making to values-based decision-making. There's an emphasis on political correctness. Full equality, no discrimination, and a focus not just on the basic needs, but on the well-being of citizens, of all citizens, not the elites, but of all citizens. And now we move to the new worldview, which is percolating through, particularly among people living in countries which are run from people awareness. We have this idea of something more, where we want to fully express who we are and have meaning, find meaning in our lives, and have that encouraged by the type of governance system that represents us. So direct representation from age group, because each age group has particular needs. I'll explain what I mean by that, because we all evolve and grow in different stages of psychological development, and each stage has different needs. So young people have different needs to old people, age people, and whatever you need is what we value. So the values of different age groups are different. There's no ideological political parties here. We've got past that. We've developed a way of living together in people awareness where people basic needs are taken care of, and now we can start to take care of their growth needs. Here we shift from spirituality into what I call soul awareness. If I often say to people, you know, if you focus on spirituality, that's great. There's lots of great things in spirituality, like yoga and meditation, and they're all very, very useful. But when you focus on this, you're focusing on the journey. Whereas actually, when you focus on soul awareness, you focus on the destination. Leadership is transnational and global. So not surprisingly, we begin to see in young people now this idea of we are transnational. And we begin to see more and more female role models showing, popping out of people awareness into this new idea of humanity awareness. And we have full equality. So here we focus on the basic and the growth needs and the full well-being of humanity. So as the level of consciousness of a group of people expands, their worldview increases and the governance system changes to reflect the worldview. So our governance systems are actually a product of our own collective psychological development. And so you can trace the psychological development of groups of people through the worldviews that they adopt. The new worldview at each stage of development is more inclusive. So the us gets bigger and the them gets smaller. And so eventually we get to the point where we recognize the humanity of everybody. But what lies beyond humanity awareness is a question I've been thinking about. Of course, we move now to earth awareness, where we make a difference through connection and empathy, and preserving the planet becomes fundamental. Direct representation by age groups. Again, no ideological political parties. There's a cosmology of spirit awareness, of leadership is global and female dominated, full equality of gender and focus on the needs of the planet and all living systems. And yet beyond that, there is even one more. There are seven stages of psychological development. And what I'm talking about is 9 worldviews here, which coincide to a great extent with these stages of development. So now we move into unity. And this is about preserving the universe through service and compassion. Not sure what governance will look like. Not sure what this cosmology will be. It will be a new, it'll link back in a way to our foundations of clan awareness, where we become aware of the energy, the spirit energy that is living everywhere in all living creatures and even in the earth, in Gaia. Global leadership, full equality. So too soon to define what all of this is, but we're focusing on the needs of the planet and all living systems. So over the past few years, I've been tracing the evolution of consciousness, which you see on the left-hand side on a scale of 0 to 700. And I call this the global consciousness indicator, or it's the level of well-being. It's the level of well-being of nations. And here are 145 nations plotted in terms of their level of well-being in 2019. I have data for 2014, 16, 18, and 19. And on the x-axis, we see the type of democracy that these nations, so up in this top right corner, we've got a group of nations operating out of people awareness, and they are, all of them are full democracies. So this is, I update this data every year. So the people are this group here. And you see they're operating from full democracy in the top right-hand corner of this graph. Then we've got wealth awareness, which is slightly below that. And we also find that there are also flawed democracies in wealth awareness. So in nation awareness, state awareness, 1, 2, and 3. The only difference between the state awareness 1, 2, and 3 is that the influence of tribalism on state awareness. So little influence in state awareness 1, moderate influence in state awareness 2, and a lot of influence of tribalism in state awareness 3. So right now, out of 145 countries, there are 7 operating from people awareness, 8 operating from awareness, 22 from nation awareness, and 108 from various stages of state awareness. And you can see them in these color bands. So let's just go one step further. And we see it all neatly falls into these different boxes. So at this top box, we have on the right-hand side, we have full democracy nations, which are people awareness and wealth awareness. And then we have a group of nations operating from nation awareness, many of which are flawed democracies. And then we have hybrid regimes and authoritarian regimes. There are also some nations operating from state awareness 1 and 2 who are also flawed democracies. So nations with a worldview of state awareness have failed democracies, hybrid regimes, and authoritarian regimes. So what does all this mean? What's the big picture? Well, as the level of democracy increases, the level of well-being increases. Don't forget the left-hand axis, the y-axis is a measure of well-being. And how did I get to that level of well-being? Well, I used 17 global indicators. These are well-known global indicators, which have been in use for quite some time. So what are these 17 global indicators? So here in the middle, we have this model of the 7 stages of psychological development that I've been referring to, or the 7 levels of consciousness, because we grow in stages of development and we operate at levels of consciousness. So the first set of indicators are linked to the first 3 stages of psychological development. This is the base of Maslow's hierarchy, if you like. So level of corruption, health, industry, economic performance, personal safety, education, business support, etc. So these are what I call 7 indicators that focus on this lower part. Then we move to the 4th stage of development, which corresponds actually to people awareness. These are the transformation needs, so freedom, democracy, press freedom, gender equality. And then we have another set of indicators which focus on growth needs. And here they are listed on the left-hand side, which include environmental protection, environmental quality, social progress, etc., and social cohesion. So all of these 7 indicators are well documented. But what I did was I took them all and added them all to get to a global consciousness indicator. So what we see is that focusing on deficiency need, which is survival, safety, and security, we have state awareness, nation awareness, and wealth awareness. Now, there is a difference between them, which I'll explain in a moment, but basically they're focused on the basic needs. And what Maslow said was that, you know, we are, if we don't get these deficiency needs met, we can't grow and develop, because we're always, it brings up fear when our deficiency needs met, when our survival needs are not met, our safety needs are not met, or our security needs are met. We can't focus on our growth needs. So we need to be able to focus on these needs in order to move forward, which is exactly what has happened in people awareness. So in these 7 nations operating from people awareness, they have built a democratic system which includes social welfare. So in fact, these deficiency needs are taken care of for everybody, which enables them then, because of the freedom and equality, to focus on growth needs. And this is where humanity awareness comes in, because it lifts us to a new level of consciousness. A level of consciousness where we're able to see all of the other worldviews and how they're playing out, and how we can integrate them from this worldview. So there are no nations currently operating from humanity awareness, but there are nations operating from the worldview of people awareness that have some policies similar to humanity awareness. And this is particularly true of Sweden, because humanity awareness is a transnational awareness, and the Nordic countries in general pay a lot of attention to helping out on the less developed countries. So here are the full democracies operating from people awareness. Not surprisingly, we see the Nordic nations, but in there, we also see Switzerland and New Zealand. Now, here's an interesting fact. Out of these seven nations, 5 of them have women leaders. Now, that's interesting because when we go down to the next level of wealth awareness, where there are 9 nations, actually, they're not all listed there. Out of these, 8 nations. Out of these 8, 7 of them have a leader who is a man. Okay, so just go back. In people awareness, women come to the fore as leaders, and in wealth awareness, it's men. There's only one exception in this group, and that's Germany, and that's Angela Merkel. So there's a very interesting dichotomy there that says as we move higher states of consciousness, women have a much more important role to play in terms of leadership. Now we move down to nation awareness. There are a few full democracies. Here they are: Spain, France, Portugal, in Europe. But there's a lot of flawed democracies too, including the USA, which has actually over the past few years dropped down from wealth awareness, full democracy, into flawed democracy in nation awareness. And it's heading downwards significantly. And if you go to that website I showed you, you can see the movement of nations because there's data for 2016, 2014, 16, 18, and 19. Here are some of the nations operating from state awareness, which are the higher end of the scale. So ready to graduate from state awareness to nation awareness is Israel, Greece, Malaysia, Trinidad, etc. So there you have an overview of these worldviews and the nations operating from them. So let me come up with, build into the final part of this presentation, asking the question, what is the purpose of the governance system? Well, I think the purpose is a way of deciding who gets what. I remember going back 50 years on a train between London and Paris, where I met a lifetime friend, and he seemed to know a lot about democracy. I said to him, tell me then, what is your definition of democracy? He said, well, he said, that's easy, it's who gets what. And that has stayed with me. I've been thinking, wow, that is quite an interesting way of looking at it. So what needs get met for who in state awareness? So in state awareness, deficiency needs get met for the most powerful. Their survival, safety, and security needs are met by the most powerful. What happens in nation awareness is the deficiency needs get met for the governing elites. They take care of themselves. So there are more people getting their needs met because now we have various elites, not just 1 or 2 leaders, but these people are now getting their deficiency needs met. And in wealth awareness, we're still operating on deficiency needs, but these are the wealthy elites who are getting their deficiency needs met. So what happens when we move to people awareness is we move to equality, and because of the social conditions and social awareness, we get the transformation needs for everyone. Everybody gets their deficiency needs met, and they have the possibility of growing and developing through the embracing of equality. So what does humanity awareness? It takes us one stage further. It takes us to a new level. And at this level, we get the growth needs for everybody. So this is the progression of meeting needs as we move through the different worldviews. So what is the glue of identity? In nation awareness, it's shared nationality, which is mostly based on race and religion. But race and religion play a strong role in nation awareness. In wealth awareness, wealth and status. You know, in Britain we have the, you know, the upper crust, we have the people who are attached to the monarchy. The wealth and status is very apparent in many countries, the US and UK. Interestingly, well, I'll say that in a moment. Then we have people awareness. This is a shared citizenship. So this is about what country do you belong and what language do you speak. So in humanity awareness, we move to a transnational identity. We're no longer thinking about ourselves as linked to a particular country. We're thinking about, wow, I'm a human being, and you know, there are other human beings out there, and they're all basically souls having human experience, which is part of the cosmology of this higher worldview. So from nation awareness, we move to wealth awareness, and we move to people awareness. So we move from inequality, less inequality, we move to equality and freedom. We have religious discrimination and gender discrimination, and ethnic discrimination in nation awareness, flawed democracies, and the class system. In wealth awareness, there's less of a class system because the class system is really built around money. There is less ethnic discrimination. There is still gender discrimination. And in people awareness, the great equalizer is social welfare, and there's more environmental awareness, more liberal democracy, and citizenship identity. So this is the journey that we've all been on for thousands of years. And so have any nations moved through this in a coordinated way from these different worldviews? Well, has this ever happened before where we've seen nations do this, but do it consciously? It's been happening unconsciously, but doing it consciously, has this ever happened before? And the answer is yes, it has. And it's the Nordic Bildung experience, where from 1860 to 1930, a whole education program was introduced, which took nations from nation awareness into people awareness. And so what was that about? Well, it's all explained in this great book by my friend Thomas and Lene, the Bildung Program of Personal Development. From being at the very bottom of the European economy in 1860, the Nordic nations climbed to the top in the 1930s and remained prosperous and progressive ever since. Finland made a similar journey after 1918. So what was interesting here, that they saw the Industrial Revolution coming along, and they realized there'll be a mass migration from the villages to the towns, and the population needed to develop a sense of collective identity at the level of the nation. They needed moral, emotional, and cognitive development. The leaders wanted the population to author their own lives and take part in authoring a new society. And they developed a training program to do that in the folk high schools throughout these Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and then eventually Finland and also Iceland. So when you look at this graph, a famous graph of the World Values Survey, on the x-axis you've got survival values at the left and self-expression on the right. So the more you're able to meet your survival needs, the more you're able to look after your expression needs. Is basically Maslow turned onto a horizontal: survival at the left-hand side and self-actualization at the right. And then on the y-axis, you've got traditional versus secular values. Traditional being rules, regulations, religion, etc. So look in the top right-hand corner and Protestant Europe, and all of these nations here are operating from people awareness. This group is operating from wealth awareness. And what you see here is, this is Protestant Europe at the top right, and then you get to the Catholic Europe in nation awareness, okay? So people awareness, wealth awareness, and nation awareness. And all of the rest are operating at various degrees of state awareness. So how do we move to humanity awareness? Well, the answer is simple. We move on this x-axis and the y-axis by increasing democracy and personal growth and creating the environment where people can self-express. That's the fundamental issue in humanity awareness, is give people the opportunity to grow and develop and self-express. So what's the next step for the Nordic nations from people awareness to humanity awareness? Well, the next step for me are these: from social welfare, transcend and include and focus on psychological welfare. So from social welfare to psychological welfare. From freedom to self-expression. Once you have freedom, then you want to self-express. From equality, then we want fairness. From environmental awareness to environmental stewardship. Democracy to pure democracy. From citizen identity to transnational identity. And from national solutions to global solutions. So this, for me, is almost like the hit list, the goals for shifting the consciousness of people awareness to humanity awareness and shifting the level of consciousness of Nordic nations to the new worldview. And I call this humanity awareness a global build-up. The vision is to create a world where all living beings can thrive. And the mission is to build curricula and create training programs that transform human society. It's like the Bildung experience of the Nordics on steroids now, but also doing it in a sensitive way, because we're moving nations from different worldviews higher in the scale to help the evolution of human consciousness. So the Humanity Awareness Initiative seeks to accelerate the evolution of human consciousness by building curricula and training programs that support the emergence of the worldview of humanity awareness. So there are four main objectives. Create and provide curricula for the education of children, teenagers, and young adults, for young leaders, and for business and political leaders. So these new training and curricula programs for young people, for young leaders, and for business and political leaders, and to create the trainer programs in order to make this available throughout the world. So to support the implementation of these four objectives. So here you see these objectives, and here you see what's happening in terms of consciousness. We're moving people from what I call the differentiating stage of consciousness to the individuating stage. Now, most of the world lives at the differentiating stage of consciousness. Only those people, that 5 or 6% I mentioned right at the very beginning, are actually living at the individuating stage. We want to move people up through these different stages of personal development. So the implementation of the Humanity Awareness Initiative, where we have a core team, we're just putting that together right now, that provides this vision. I've been working on this vision with the core team for now 2 or 3 years, where we create curricula and design training programs and provide train-the-trainer programs and coordinate funding. And there are country teams. We are building country teams. They're beginning to happen in Brazil, Indonesia, Sweden, beginning in Iceland, in UK, and every month there are new people stepping forward and saying, yeah, I want to be part of this. So the country teams promote the vision locally, coordinate and customize the distribution of these training curricula, which can be for the public sector, private sector, and NGOs, and oversees the implementation, then provides feedback to the core team. Very flexible way of operating. So whereas in the core purpose of the worldview of people awareness was to find ways to satisfy people's deficiency needs in a national framework of existence so everybody can move to equality, the core purpose of the worldview of humanity awareness is finding ways to satisfy our growth needs, our psychological development needs in a global framework of existence. So each worldview, there was a tipping point. And so what are the tipping point or the triggering events that are beginning to throw into relief the limitations of the dominant worldview, thereby precipitating a shift in consciousness and awareness and the emergence of a new worldview? Well, here are just 3. Black Lives Matter is a triggering event moving from nation and wealth awareness into people awareness. Remember, there are only 7 nations in people awareness, and there are only 8 nations in wealth awareness. So Black Lives Matter is actually triggering a movement of consciousness upwards into higher order worldview. Now, in terms of triggering events for humanity awareness, the climate crisis, a global crisis, we can't solve that problem at the national level. We have to move to humanity awareness to solve that problem. And COVID-19 is just a step along the way. It's accelerating the idea that we need to shift to people awareness. So we're at an amazing turning point right now where the new worldview needs to emerge. And I believe that worldview is humanity awareness. Now, what will that look like in different sectors? Well, I'll briefly explain, and then we'll come to the end of the presentation. So in governance, it'll be about direct representation. We will lose the idea of ideological propaganda, and we would try to provide the well-being for everyone. And so people at different stages of development have different needs and therefore different values. So we need to engage all the people at different stages of development, at different ages in the democratic process, and do it directly. There are very few direct representation governance. So you find some of them in the cantons of Switzerland, but that must be the way forward if we're going to take care of the needs of everybody. In health, we're going to see much more focus on the psychotherapeutic and energy approaches to healing, as well as health maintenance and disease prevention. Something I've been talking about for a long time and writing about is what I call the impact of ego-soul dynamics on the human energy field. Actually, all illness in my book starts in the energy field, and it starts in the mind. And, you know, many people, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is true, and this will change the way we operate our health systems. In education, it'll be child-centered, values-based education programs. These programs are focused on supporting children's natural gifts and talents, helping them to self-express, helping them to connect with others in additional loving relationships and contribute to the well-being of the world. That will start at a very young age. In leadership, we'll be looking for what I call full spectrum leaders, leaders that can operate from all of those 7 levels of consciousness. I've been talking about this for 20 years, and with Barrett Value Center, we have ways of measuring full spectrum leadership. But the full spectrum leaders are willing to face their fears, challenge the status quo, and without any regard for personal gain. They're seeking to be the best for the world, not the best in the world. That is a huge shift. And unless we address the dominant yet outdated worldview that we're operating from now, we will never get there. We will never be able to develop a sustainable, ethic, and inclusive business model. In business, we're wanting to create meaningful economies, one that people thrive in psychologically healthy cultures, with work that supports full human self-expression and the ecology of the planet. We need to change our work and our business environment significantly. It's to focus on the growth needs of people. It means becoming deliberately developmental organizations, as Professor Keegan talks about in his books. Justice. We will focus on helping, restoring people to wholeness. When people do so-called bad things or commit crimes because they never got their needs met during the first 20 years of their lives. And so the whole idea now is psychological debilitation. And in the arts, I believe that art holds the key to the flourishing of humanity awareness because it's the key to self-expression. It allows us to express our unique gifts and talents in service to the growth and well-being of humanity. And gender relations. We in people awareness, we're focusing on external equality, that is, but in humanity awareness, we focus on internal equality. The integration of female energies of yin in the male and the integration of male energies of yang in the female, So it's more of an inner gender program where we embrace the opposite aspect of our gender energy. And the environment, we will learn to steward the earth and conserve its natural needs or resources. We'll be looking to the needs of future generations. We'll go beyond sustainability to focus on ecological resilience. And then lastly, in finance, we will apply our higher consciousness to the use of financial capital. Financial capital gets used basically following the consciousness of the worldview, of the dominant worldview. We need to bring our higher consciousness to the use of financial capital. And in that respect, there is a future capital initiative, which is I'm a member of, which is looking for ways to do this. So we will build a new economic and financial system that brings prosperity to all and preserves the birthright of future generations. So you want to find out more about this? You can go to the website, Academy for the Advancement of Human Values.global, HV.global, that's the Barrett Academy. You can find more information. There's a free e-learning course. You can go to the Academy and sign up for the e-learning programs, and you get 3 free e-learning courses. One of them is on humanity awareness, and you can read my latest book that came out in January, Worldview Dynamics and the Well-Being of Nations, where much of this is explained. And I think the most important part of this book is that it asks the question, how can political and institutional organizational leaders and organizational leaders understand and hold the space for the diverse developmental needs of their citizens, supporters, and employees by developing governance practices and policies that enable people to live fulfilling and meaningful lives? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. A lot to take in and a brilliant presentation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You really do offer a roadmap to humanity awareness.
Well, I've been thinking about it for quite some time, about 5 years actually, and so this is the culmination of my thinking so far. There is more to do, obviously. This is not, more people need to participate. We need to co-create this new worldview. Definitely.
And what better place than Democracy Week?
Yes. So when you said to me, would you like to say something? I thought, well, what a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Patrick.